his mother was sick back at their tent, and he was running to the well to get her water, and a malicious sniper intentionally followed him across the prairie and shot him dead as he was running to get water.
It was a moment that generated a huge amount of debate and hand-wringing and conversation, really, about this bigger struggle between labor and capital. About the rights that workers should have, about the prerogatives that capitalists should have.
This is a story of brave men and women led by a man named Louis Tikas, who stood against powerful mining companies in order to secure basic rights for miners through courageous acts of violence.
The miners in the Ludlow Massacre fought for better working conditions and a better lifestyle by joining together and taking a stand against John D. Rockefeller Jr. and his Colorado Fuel and Iron.
On April 20th, 1914, 26 people, including Louis Tikas, were killed by Colorado Guardsmen. They did not die in vain, but in hope that one day, miners, immigrants, and their families would receive basic human rights.
Immigration into the United States became more and more popular as foreigners were offered an opportunity to walk the streets of gold. With the promised good jobs, immigrants flocked to the U.S. in hopes of finding a better life. Between 1891 and 1910, there were more than 183,000 Greeks who immigrated to the U.S., including Louis Tikas.
The leader of the Ludlow tent colony and in a lot of ways the most famous victim of the Ludlow Massacre was Louis Tikas. Tikas was a Greek man who'd come to Denver originally. There's not much evidence that he was actually ever much of a miner. He may not have mined at all, but he becomes involved in the strike, and fairly quickly he becomes, he's often referred to as the captain of the Greeks.
Approximately 5,071 miles across the globe in Richford, New York, a man by the name John D. Rockefeller Jr. was born to John D. Rockefeller Sr., who owned many coal and oil companies in Colorado. For his 22nd birthday, John D. Rockefeller Jr. received 40% of Colorado Fuel and Iron Corporation.
Take responsibility for being a controlling shareholder, but it's true that he wasn't the majority owner, and it's also true that his name was so famous that it was, you might say, easy for people looking for someone to blame to go after an individual with a very famous name.
These two men from vastly different worlds clash when the coalfield war in Colorado begins to emerge. Colorado Fuel and Iron was the coal mining company that controlled many of the coal mines in the West. Colorado Fuel and Iron, also known as CF&I, was the largest steel mill west of the Mississippi. CF&I brought industrialization to the West and controlled approximately 90% of the country's pipelines and refineries.
Miners from around the world clustered together living in mining towns built by the mining companies.
The reason why Rockefeller hired people from different ethnicities is so they couldn't communicate, so that they would not be speaking the same language, so that they would not, band together.
Miners' homes were shanties with leaky roofs and little heat and light. Sometimes the villages were protected by armed guards so miners could not leave the camps. The miners were treated like prisoners. Miners worked long shifts in the dangerous mines. Accidents in the southern mines were 5 times the national average for the industry. In 1910, over 400 miners died in Colorado.
The miners worked all day, and at the end their coal was weighed. The companies did not take into account the backbreaking work that was required to mine the coal, such as building the mine shaft. The miners were paid in script, money that was only redeemable at company stores. The miners could only shop at company stores, watch company-approved movies, and their children went to company-endorsed schools. The mine companies essentially controlled every aspect of the miners' lives.
Grandfather said that they cared more about the mules than the people.
Because of the injustices of the miners, unions were beginning to emerge. The largest union was the United Mine Workers of America, also known as the UMWA, whose philosophy and ideas attracted Louis Tikas.
Louis Tikas learned what was happening in these mining camps, and with his charismatic and confident personality, others began to follow him. With the help of the UMWA, Louis Tikas and other miners drafted a set of demands to present to CF&I. The miners wanted an 8-hour workday with a defined work week, and to raise the minimum wage 10%. In Colorado, there was a set of safety laws, but they were rarely recognized. Workers wanted the laws to be enforced. The miners also wanted recognition of their union. They wanted the abolishment of script and the elimination of guards who made their living conditions feel like concentration camps.
This clashed with CF&I's belief that they could do whatever they wanted with their private property in pursuit of the highest profits possible. The miners threatened to go on strike if their requests were not met by September 23, 1913. When the day came, nothing had changed, so 90% of the workforce, about 10,000 people, went on strike. Later that day, everybody living in the mining towns controlled by mine companies were evicted. They went to go live in tents supplied by the UMWA.
The tent colonies were nicknamed the White City because of all the white tent tops and a reference to the dreamlike buildings from the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. This was no dream. This was a nightmare. As the months went on, tensions rose and the miners began demanding that their rights be changed. In search of leadership, the miners looked towards Louis Tikas. He inspired the miners by instilling courage in those who were afraid to continue living in a world of constant suffering.
In 1914, John D. Rockefeller hired strikebreakers. The miners refused to succumb to the gunmen and returned to the mines. They continued to demand their rights.
Unsatisfied with the inaction, the miners would destroy company property. One of the most prominent acts of violence from the company against the miners was the death of Gerald Lippett, a United Mines worker who was shot to death by George Belcher and Walter Belk, both strikebreakers. A jury of 6 ruled it justifiable homicide.
In addition, people across Colorado took a stand against the Colorado government in support of the striking miners in Ludlow. In Denver, the UMWA issued a call to arms. 300 miners in protest went to Ludlow to cut telephone and telegraph wires. Railroad workers refused to take soldiers from Trinidad to Ludlow, and in Denver, 82 soldiers and a company troop on a train headed to Ludlow refused to go. In Colorado Springs, 300 Union miners walked off their jobs and headed to Ludlow. Tensions were building.
In an effort to suppress the uprising, the governor called in the National Guard to fight the miners in retaliation. When the National Guard first arrived, the miners and their families thought the National Guard was on their side and was sent to aid them. When they began fighting the miners, they quickly realized that the troops were sent to destroy the strike. The National Guard had been arresting people by the hundreds, but despite threats of violence, the miners did not give up. In April 1914, another National Guard company was brought in to fight the uprisers.
Morning of April 20th, 1914, the miners slept in after a long night of celebrating the Greek Orthodox Easter. That morning, at around 6 a.m., a machine gun attack broke out on the tents. For the safety of the miners and their families, holding a white flag, Louis Tikas walked to the National Guard post in an effort to negotiate a truce.
But Louis Tikas was, beaten, told to run, and then shot in the back. To me, he was clearly murdered.
On that same morning, the hills of Ludlow were lit up by the fire of burning tents. As families fled the flames, the guardsmen shot at them. 13 people were killed in the gunfire.
Said that he watched this militiaman bayonet this baby and hold it up on the end of his gun, laughing and smiling that he had killed one of them.
One day after the massacre, a telephone linesman was going through the ruins and found an iron cot covering a pit where he found burnt and distorted bodies of 11 children and 2 women. One of those women was a pregnant mother named Selena Costa. After the bodies were discovered, the incident was known as the Ludlow Massacre. 26 men, women, and children were killed.
Shortly after the incident, many labor rights groups emerged using the slogan, "Remember Ludlow." In an effort to recognize the miners' demands, Rockefeller created a company union, which was an organization of workers created by the company to ensure the rights of laborers. People who were in the union made some progress by helping change the working and living conditions of miners.
For his reputation, Rockefeller created a handbook on the welfare work of CF&I, which was distributed across the country. The battle in Ludlow encouraged other miners working under the same conditions to rally together and take a stand. The fear of another massacre scared large coal and industrial companies to change their working standards to avoid an uprising.
Later, the Coal Mine Safety and Health Act of 1969 included procedure for improved mandatory health and safety standards. In 1977, the Mine Safety and Health Administration was formed. Overall, the Ludlow Massacre brought upon new labor restriction throughout America, and the miners who took a stand for their rights have enabled those in the present day to stand for theirs as well.
Despite efforts to change working conditions, sadly, mining accidents still occur today in one of the poorest areas of our country, the Appalachian Mountains, including the Sago mine disaster in 2006, where 12 people died. The mine was found to have over 200 safety violations.
We can learn from our past to prevail in the future and remember Ludlow for the sake of workers' rights everywhere.
I helped some people.